Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Amit Harari, and coming up in today's newscast. Yesterday's mass protests not having an immediate effect as the Knesset passing a first and significant bill as part of the judicial overhaul. Meantime, the United Nations passing a statement condemning Israeli settlement policy. And major defense exhibition opening in Abu Dhabi with Israeli companies showing impressive attendance. The Knesset has passed the first reading of a law that is a part of the coalition planned judicial overhaul. The vote came with mass protest outside the Knesset and hours of fiery speeches from the coalition and opposition. We get more in this report from ILTV's Steve Leibovich.
After a day of mass protests outside the Knesset and many hours of rambunctious debate in the plenum, the coalition managed to clear a major hurdle toward implementing the first part of its planned judicial reform. The bill gives the coalition politicians control over the selection of high court judges and limits high court ability to review laws. The votes were preceded by more than 6 hours of fiery debate. Justice Minister Yariv Levin and coalition MKs insisted the legislation would strengthen Israeli democracy, while the opposition warned the government was destroying its foundations. These comments from Prime Minister Netanyahu and opposition leader Lapid in the dramatic hours leading up to the vote.
בדמוקרטיה, העם מצביע בבחירות, ונציגי העם מצביעים כאן בכנסת. קוראים לזה דמוקרטיה. לצערי, מנהיגי המחאה רומסים את הדמוקרטיה. הם לא מקבלים את תוצאות הבחירות, הם לא מקבלים את הכרעת הרוב.
היום בלילה מדינת ישראל תעשה את הצעד הראשון לקראת הפיכתה למדינה לא דמוקרטית. הממשלה מעלה להצבעה בקריאה ראשונה שני חוקים לביטול הדמוקרטיה בישראל.
The votes finally took place shortly after midnight.
63 בעד, 47 נגד. אני קובע שהצעת חוק בתי המשפט, תיקון מספר 105, הוראות לעניין הוועדה לבחירת שופטים, התשפ"ג 2023, התקבלה בקריאה הראשונה ותחזור לוועדת החוקה, חוק ומשפט להכנתה לקריאה השנייה והשלישית, ושוב מביע תקווה כי נעבוד עליו יחד לטובת עם ישראל.
Several opposition MKs chose to boycott the vote, calling the process illegitimate. The proposed law now returns to the Knesset Constitution, Law, and Justice Committee for preparation for its second and third readings, which were expected by the end of March. Justice Minister Yariv Levin, the key architect of the overhaul, hailed the vote as a move toward bringing back democracy by bringing wider representation to the judiciary. Prime Minister Netanyahu celebrated the vote as a great day. Opposition National Unity Party leader Benny Gantz called it a black day for democracy, adding, "Now we continue the struggle."
Now, this is a developing story day by day as the Knesset has now passed the first reading of the law, part of the coalition planned judicial overhaul, with masses of citizens opposing the move. And with us here in studio today is our Jerusalem correspondent, Steve Leibovich. Steve, that was sure a dramatic day in Jerusalem. After midnight, the vote passed. What's the next step?
It was dramatic all day and into the night. I managed to stay awake somehow and still get here on time. The next thing has already begun. After declaring victory, the coalition, led by Yariv Levin and, of course, Simcha Rotman, the head of the Law Committee, went right back and started pushing additional parts of the judicial reform through the Law Committee so that they can also be brought up for a first reading in the not-too-distant future. The opposition said, we're going back into the streets. We're going to continue our protests. We have to stop this. Both sides have gone back to their position that they had a day before.
Now, people are surely asking, why is nobody listening? I mean, mass protests, lots of people on the street, tens of thousands we're seeing in like lots of weeks in a row. How come no one is listening? I mean, we're not hearing any statements. What's happening?
Well, one person is listening, and that's President Herzog. He is not only listening, he's very, very frustrated now. He made comments this morning after the vote expressing his disappointment, his profound disappointment. We're reaching the point where people are questioning whether, once the bill is actually passed in its second and third reading, if it doesn't go through significant changes, whether or not Herzog will sign the bill, which he's kind of required to do by law, and he may choose to resign. I don't think we've reached that point, but President Herzog is very upset with both sides, opposition and coalition, that they don't appear to really be ready to sit down and talk.
You see it happening anytime soon, them sitting and talking?
I don't. I do see Herzog continuing to try, but I'll tell you this. Last night, one of the most interesting speeches that I've seen in all the years that I've seen Knesset speeches was Yariv Levin's congratulating himself as the issue was about to come to the vote. It was one of the most, I'm not going to say extreme, but it was one of the least compromising and celebratory, triumphant speeches I've heard in a while, where he made it sound very clear that he has no intention of making any major changes in this. He wants to go straight through, pass it as it is, and he thinks it's a great day for democracy.
Now, this morning, the Knesset Law Committee was back working on other parts of the controversial legislation. We know that.
Yeah, and they're going to bring it for a first reading in the Knesset, and they want to bring the entire package to the Knesset by about Passover, which is not too far away. People are already starting to think about where they're going to go on Passover vacation and Passover cleaning. We may be under a completely different judicial system by Passover unless there's some kind of a pause, which I don't see happening at this time.
Now, people seem very serious this time. I mean, the protests are not about to end, as we see. Now, Justice Minister Levin is hailing this, as he said, as a great day of democracy. Some of the opposition see it as the beginning of the end of democracy. It does not sound like there's much room for compromise.
We're very lucky that our people don't have the same temperament, or at least the protesters, as in, let's say, China, where we saw protests in Hong Kong that became very violent over similar issue of democracy. Fortunately for Israel, at least until now, the protests have been extremely calm, not violent at all. The police hardly had anything to do in terms of...
What makes you really think it's this calm? I mean, what makes you think they're leaving it like this?
It could be either the calm before the storm, and there could be a lot worse coming up in the streets. I certainly hope not, and I certainly hope that the sides at least reach a point where the vast majority of the public will think that it's a good idea, and not only the coalition.
All right, Steve, where do you see this going?
It's not going any place well right now. There'll be more protests in the streets. There'll be more blocking of traffic. I imagine it'll take the form of more civil disobedience with sit-ins and other steps taken by the opponents. They're becoming more and more desperate, and the coalition remains as determined as ever and thinks that they're doing the right thing for the country.
Any outer influences? What's the U.S. saying? I mean,
the U.S. made it very clear. They wanted Israel to pump the brakes, and Netanyahu basically went right through the red light. And that's where we are now. We're on the other side of that light, and we're moving towards whatever it is that this government is promising us.
All right, Steve Leibovich, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you very much. The United Nations Security Council has passed a statement condemning Israeli settlement policy. The statement came after the U.S. managed to convince the Palestinians and its backers to withdraw a binding resolution that Washington threatened to veto. We get more from ILTV's William Sharon.
In a largely symbolic statement, the world body expressed dismay over Israel's announced intention to expand settlement activity and legalize outposts. The presidential statement refers to the Israeli cabinet decision to legalize 9 outposts and approve plans for some of 10,000 settlement homes for advancement this week.